Well, hello everyone. I'm really delighted to welcome you all to TNC's latest podcast. And the topic today is the future of the contact center and customer engagement. So I'm John Waterhouse, CEO of TNC, and I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes. As I'm sure everyone joining knows, TNC is the UK's largest independent telecom strategy and sourcing consultancy. We support over 280 major UK multinational companies and help them to get the best possible commercial, technical, and operational results from their network telecoms and, of course, contact center solutions. So, joining us today from TNC to share his wisdom and insight is our CTO, Craig Northveth. Craig, do you want to say hello to our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, good morning, John. Hello, everybody listening. It's great to be here today.
So, today's topic, the future of the contact center and customer engagement. This is an extremely interesting topic, and it's of course particularly timely. So, contact center leaders are facing a new set of challenges to fulfill their operational and strategic objectives. These challenges were already happening pre-COVID. COVID's only made it more interesting and more challenging for them. Changing customer expectations, the evolution of technology, and as we said, COVID as well, have all created a really significant set of challenges for contact center leaders. Through 2020, here at TNC, we've been tracking a number of key trends across the market. I think the most interesting of these, we've seen the rise of natural language processing, the use of AI to capture caller intent, route, and indeed even enable self-serve of customer queries, and of course the enormous shift of agents to working at home. So we're going to look at two key topics today. What is driving change in the contact center? We're going to dive down into that, and then the second thing we're going to look at is how are organizations reacting to this changing landscape, and how do we expect those reactions to change looking forwards. So, Craig, without further ado, let's dive into that first topic. Can you guide us through what is driving change in the contact center?
Yeah, sure, John. So I think perhaps the biggest change that we've seen over the last year or so, or probably maybe beyond that, if you like, is changing consumer expectations. So we are seeing a number of things that are happening, I guess, in terms of how people interact with organisations. So there's demographic change. That's one of the key things. People are getting younger people have got access to more technology these days, and the ways that they want to interact and communicate with organizations is significantly different to maybe the older generation. So that's presenting quite a number of challenges, but also opportunities for organizations in terms of how they want to interact and engage with the consumer. So we often hear a term called channel of choice. So this is largely kind of driven around omni-channel, if you like, and it's having the ability to be able to interact across many different mediums. So whether that's traditional telephone, whether it's through the web, whether it's through a chat client, whether it's through SMS, even new kind of models that we're seeing now. We're seeing interaction through things like IoT. So within the, I guess, in the car insurance space, if you like, being able to have the black box interact directly with the contact center if there's an accident or an emergency. So a lot more interaction, different methods within that kind of contact or customer engagement platform. I think the second piece around customer expectations is that consumers expect a more personalized experience these days. So they want to be treated like they've effectively been given something that's unique to them. So whether that's through being able to identify the purpose or their intent of their contact, and being able to drive that contact in a certain way, which effectively optimizes their experience. So that takes a lot of things in terms of being able to initially identify that customer, being able to understand what their intent of their call is, also kind of understand their sentiment as well. So why are they calling? Are they happy? Are they angry? And what do we need to do with this call to try and resolve the issue as quickly as possible, and effectively deliver a great customer experience. Um, I think the final point around consumer expectations is actually because of all of these things, because we're starting to see better personalized services, because we're starting to see organizations offer a channel of choice for a consumer. those organizations that are not doing that, consumers are starting to kind of build a bit of a low tolerance to suboptimal services. So organizations that are not offering these, multiple channels into the business, not offering personalized experiences, are now starting to struggle to, I guess, acquire and retain customers, because obviously there's much more opportunity and availability of services across the market. So I think that is largely, one of the biggest changes that we're seeing from a customer focus is that expectations are shifting, and organisations are having to, rally around effectively to keep up with the trends of the consumer.
Mm. And I guess not just shifting expectations, but increasing expectations. Customers want a higher quality interaction through a contact center than they're perhaps prepared to accept 1, 2, 3 years ago.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think people are more susceptible to actually accept things like self-service these days as well. So, again, looking back a few years, most contacts were dealt with by human agents. Now that back then it may have been quite a long handling time. It might have been, quite a long process to effectively resolve an issue that you had,
Mm.
or you may have just had a simple transaction or a simple query that could be dealt with, much quicker if you could get to the people that you need to speak to much quicker. Um, I think the fact that, we're starting to see lots of enhancements around self-service capabilities. We're seeing lots of enhancements around. You mentioned things like natural language, conversational IVR type capabilities, and deeper integration into back-end systems, to be able to effectively self-serve more complex tasks. People are quite happy with that now. If they can quickly navigate their query and get it resolved, or make a payment, or order something without having to interact, with another human, if you like. People are quite, amenable to doing that now.
Mm.
Okay, so sorry, John. Yeah.
No, 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 no. I was just going to say. Presumably, this is what's leading on into some of this technology evolution that we're seeing is trying to address some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we've seen a natural evolution in the technology stack within the contact center. So, again, traditionally, calls, or telephony was a primary channel for most contact centers, and actually, to be fair, to this day, for many contact centers, it still is a primary channel. I think what we've seen maybe over the last 2 years is that the percentage of interactions that come in via telephony, albeit still, the major contact method, is starting to decline in favour of other digital engagement channels. So this is where organisations are now looking at how to digitally transform their environments to be able to enable that channel of choice approach. Looking at what systems of engagement need to be put in place to be able to accept things like, WhatsApp messages, or Twitter, Twitter messages, IoT type capabilities, and even, as we move into the future, and looking at the likes of, Amazon and Google, and, the kind of Alexa and Siri type applications, how you can effectively use them to also communicate into an organization's contacts environment. So we've seen a lot more enhancements around technology. Um, I think the key, well, I guess the biggest thing that we're seeing more than anything is, at the front end of the customer engagement. So moving away from the traditional method of, punching in option one to go through to this department, option two to go through this department, and go through 7 different, options effectively to try and get to where you need to get to moving that towards more of a sort of speech recognition or intent capture type model. So using natural language to identify through a number of utterances, if you like, what that caller's intent is, and then using intelligence within the platform effectively to route that, to the most suitable agent using attribute routing. Um, in addition to that, what we're also seeing as part of that process is, increased ability to kind of identify and verify a customer as well. So various mechanisms around being able to input pertinent information. It could be like an account number, it could be a date of birth, it could be, a postcode or something like that, to be able to identify and verify that the caller is the caller.
Mhm.
I think at the more complex side of things, we started to see increased use of voice biometrics, again, to do that same thing in terms of really identify who that customer is, particularly within the kind of banking sectors, to then improve access into their financial accounts and whatever else. So lots of growing capability in that space, and I think certainly within the last year, the maturity of that type of technology has significantly increased. And I think again, when we touched upon before the likes of Alexa and Siri and other types of capabilities like that, it's the same type of technology that's being used within the consumer world as what's being used within these kind of speech recognition engines.
Mhm.
So the fact that it's growing so quickly within the consumer world effectively means that that technology and the evolution of that capability is then being presented into the business world as well, with potentially lots of benefits. I think the final point on that then is taking that to the next level. So, we know that speech recognition's come on. We know that the kind of speech to text and text to speech type capabilities have come on because of the consumerization of some of these services. But what we're starting to see now is models being built by organizations that allow more of a sort of conversational IVR flow.
Mhm.
So it's kind of, you're talking with a bot as opposed to talking with a human, to get to that position where you can either identify if a call can be self-served, or actually, you can identify specifically where that call needs to be dealt with by a human if it's a more complex type capability. So all of these things are capabilities that are being driven into the market, largely being driven from a cloud basis. So we don't see many organizations enhancing their on-premise capabilities to deliver this type of function. What we've typically seen is more of a kind of hybrid type approach where some of this intelligence sits in the cloud, and then at the point of delivery to the contact center effectively is handed back off to maybe a legacy platform. But sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, is cloud a requirement for these? Presumably, they can be done on prem, but you're saying the predominant model now is the people who are enabling these functions in the cloud.
Yeah, largely. I mean, I think we've had maybe one or two examples where people have tried to do this on-prem with kind of on-prem capabilities, and I think they've found that the functionality of that model is fairly limited. Whereas the organizations in the cloud are kind of the hyperscalers that are really in this space at the minute. So
Mm.
the kind of Amazons, the Googles, these types of organizations that have got that capability, IBM as well. So the the model of consuming that as a service, outside of their on-premise environments, and then delivering the output of that service effectively to the contact center once all the treatment's been applied, is the most typical model that we're seeing. Um, we are also seeing some evolution in that space around actually moving some of the traditional functions. So the kind of agent desktop, the queuing, the traditional IVR type capabilities, the call recording, the workforce management services, seeing them also being elevated to the cloud now. And I think based on recent procurements that we've run, that seems to now be the default model to consume them services from the cloud as well. So really quite a shift in terms of traditional environments up into the cloud.
And to what extent is that being driven as well by the need to enable agents to work at home and to have that more flexible sort of way of working?
Yeah, massively. And again, I think this is another driver. Once a service is effectively moved out into the cloud, it in effect becomes a software as a service type application. It can be consumed across public internet services. So at the most basic level, organizations that have effectively moved their agent capability to the cloud would be able to access it across the internet as almost like a WebRTC connection. So it's a browser-based agent connectivity model. Um, Other organizations that need higher levels of availability and stability, I guess, still potentially deliver telephony in a slightly different way, so in the traditional way. So where, again, largely driven by COVID, a lot of organizations have had to send their agents to work from home. So they are either delivering telephony via the WebRTC method I just mentioned there, or they're delivering it to soft phones, effectively VPN connection back into traditional environments and delivering it onto a soft phone, effectively a client sat on the device on a laptop, for instance. Or in some cases, actually, they're using more of a BYOD type model. So they're diverting calls back into people's mobiles or people's home phones, or they're providing mobiles and effectively delivering calls into mobile states as well. So there's a bit of a mixed bag at the minute. I think ultimately, the WebRTC route, or the access across the internet is probably going to be the model a lot of organisations settle on, as the kind of strategy gets developed over the next year or so.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. So, I mean, as you rightly say, there's a huge amount of change going on, both in terms of what the consumer wants and expects from their engagement with the contact center, and obviously the technology is evolving enormously to deal with those expectations, to meet those expectations, but also obviously to do so in a COVID environment where you can't have hundreds of thousands of agents sat in a all working together in a building. You've got to get them working from home, etc. So looking at those trends of the technology, etc. And thinking about how this plays into our second topic, how would you say organizations are reacting to the changing landscape? And I think you're probably going to talk at this stage about sort of customer engagement strategy and defining that. Is that the first step in this process?
Yeah, that's what we would always recommend. I mean, we've seen various different approaches customers take. So some customers look at technology first and try to build a technology stack to meet the customer demands. But we've often seen that fails because the customer requirements and the customer engagement strategy is not being well defined to be
Mm,
able to map and interpret what technical requirements are needed. So we always kind of push down the route of actually defining the customer journey first. So understanding what channels you are going to effectively deliver or present to customers,
mm,
how them channels effectively ingressed into the technology. So what systems of engagement do you need to have? So again, talking about things like the IVR, whether that's more of a speech recognition base, or whether it's a traditional model, whether or not you're going to ingress social channels, whether you're going to ingress and egress SMS type services, IoT type services, whether telephony is still going to be the kind of primary channel. So all of these things in terms of what's the best approach for the customer, what does that customer journey look like, how can we optimize, how can we personalize that customer journey, is always the kind of key thing to start with. Um, Typically, then that would look like trying to do some opportunity assessments and scenario modelings as well around different approaches to the customer journey. So if there's a objective to save cost, for instance, then likely that you're going to be trying to push the customer into more of a self-serve model. So you can reduce headcount, because that's ultimately where the biggest cost would sit
mm.
within the contact center operation. However, if you want to improve, say your CSAT score or something like that, then the approach might be to actually offer as many channels as possible. So you've got multiple engagement opportunities. You become more of an engagement hub as opposed to a contact center,
Mhm.
and that allows more. It attracts more customers in terms of acquiring customers, but it also enables retention of customers as well, because you're offering much more service capability to them. So I think there's quite a bit to be done around customer engagement strategy in terms of defining the journey, but also looking at the opportunity assessment and modeling out different scenarios to understand what works best for the customer, what works best from a cost perspective, and obviously what the operational aspects will look like as well.
And presumably that provides the key inputs you're going to need for that technology roadmap. As you said, there's organizations that tried to start with the technology, have struggled with that approach because they haven't got those key inputs defined. But
Yeah,
presumably armed with that customer engagement strategy and those inputs, that's when you can really start looking at the technology stack and
exactly
defining
that.
that.
Exactly that. Yeah. So I think one of the core parts of the customer engagement strategy, or one of the things that will recognise, is what data do you need access to. So what we typically find is organisations have customer data generally scattered across different systems of record, for different services that they offer. So what the customer engagement strategy will define is, well, what data is required to be able to make some of these decisions in terms of the channel entry. So what are the decision points? What's the next best actions? What do we do? How do we access that data?
Hmm.
That then effectively comes into the kind of technology roadmap in terms of, right, what systems of engagement do we need? So what's the kind of interface to the customer? What integrations do we then need in terms of our back-end data? What decision points do we need, or what processes do we need to align around these integrations and systems engagement to ensure that we fully align and map to that personalized customer journey? And also kind of, from a very basic technology level, what technology do we need? Are we looking at retaining physical infrastructure? Are we looking at moving to more of a kind of subscription based low code model, which is effectively all consumed from the cloud? It really drives what type of technology you need to effectively meet that customer engagement strategy, which ultimately is what the business is looking to do.
You touched on the thorny topic of commercials and price and so. Uh, uh, there's too complex a topic to deal with in the last 2 minutes of a podcast, but presumably we're seeing some very different cost models for these different approaches. I mean, for a start, you've already talked about subscription versus consumption.
Yeah,
And I know that's one key area. You're also talking about potentially retaining existing platforms and augmenting them with cloud-based capabilities. So presumably, the number of cost models one could create for this sort of transformation is almost endless.
absolutely. And again, this comes down to the kind of opportunity assessment and scenario modeling piece. Commercial has got to be a key function of that, because it is complex. There is retained infrastructure costs, there's retained support costs, retained managed service costs if you keep some sort of infrastructure on prem or as a hosted solution within service providers network. And then you've got the two variations of cloud costs. So subscription, so that's kind of typically licensing type costs, which would be subscribed to on a month by month or an annual or multi-year basis. Or actually the newer models that we're seeing coming into the market are pure consumption. So for every call or every minute, if you like, that an interaction sits within the platform, you're effectively racking up consumption charges. It's really interesting on the consumption model. We do see the costs appear to be very low, 0.01 cents or something for a transaction. But when you're doing 50, 60 million transactions a year, then you can see it soon racks up relatively quickly. So there is a lot of modeling to be done around that commercial piece. And again, it comes to the state of what you're trying to achieve. Are you looking to deflect more calls? Are you looking to deliver better customer service? Do you still want people in the mix? Do you still want to, or do you want to automate? And really kind of what service offering you want to deliver from an omni-channel perspective. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about on the commercial side of things.
As always, we I think our listeners must think we deliberately end on a a cliffhanger every time, and it's just these topics are so big and there's so much interesting stuff to dive into. I think we're probably going to have to do we're going to have to move to a weekly podcast just so we can dive into the commercials and the different consumption models and so on. But sadly, we're going to have to draw this particular podcast to an end because we've as always exceeded our 20 minutes, but not by too much this time. So Craig, thank you as always for your insights. You've said many interesting things today, and as always, I enjoy learning and listening to what you've got to say. Thank you as always to our listeners and viewers for joining us. Do let us know any questions you may have about this or about any other network and telecoms topic. You can get in touch with us at our website, so networkcollective.co.uk, or of course through any of the usual social channels. And we look forward to talking with you again soon.